Hello, gorgeous.
You see, in this world, there's two kinds of people, my friend.
Be afraid. Be very afraid.
You're tearing me apart!
Onto your butt.
Round up the usual suspects.
Fasten your seatbelts. It's going to be a bumpy night.
Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Man Bites Retro. That's right, Man Bites Retro.
Let's not be sexist here. Man and woman bites retro.
Yes, indeed. And that other voice that you're hearing on the other side, go ahead and introduce yourself completely.
Completely?
Completely, that's right. What you do, what your name is, and all that stuff.
Okay, that just sounds weird.
You have to sell yourself.
To sell myself.
And I don't mean that in a sexist way at all.
Yeah, with you with your phone sex voice. I'm the fabulous Naomi, the marketing genius behind Man Bites Film.
That's right.
Yep.
Oh, Man Bites Media, completely. Hopefully, now that we're rebranding our Man Bites Retro for our classic episodes and classic movies, because Naomi has introduced to me the classic films that I cannot bring up with the two idiots that I do the podcast with. Because they're uncultured swines. So, yeah, that's a little poke and stab at Brandon and William. So, yeah, fuck you guys. And today we are actually bringing a fun, amazing, just great film that I had never seen until Naomi brought it to my attention. And that is 1960s, on the dot 1960s, The Apartment. You want to give us a little bit of a rundown on the movie and a little bit of the reason why you picked this movie for me to watch?
Yeah, so basically, I think The Apartment is one of those quintessential movies that you have to watch if you have an appreciation for any type of classic cinema. I mean, it's Jack Lemmon at the height of being Jack Lemmon. And basically, it's also kind of, I think, film noir-esque at its greatest, though, because it's got that kind of dark, seedy element that's not really associated with the 1960s, which is given that Pollyanna effect usually now looking back at it. And this is really, it was very dark and kind of had some very dark undertones for its time even, you know?
Oh, yeah, it definitely did. It had very much that psycho-esque sense that it was way ahead of its time in its approach to a situation. Now, to give a little bit of a rundown of what the movie is, a quick synopsis, you know, the movie is basically about a man, which it works in this giant corporation in New York, and he is lucky enough to afford an apartment that is right by his job. But that cedes the quick advantage of him, but also it allows him to be taken advantage of by the executives of this company. Because all of them, we all know from watching Mad Men, they all have their side chicks. Always, because
Keeping it classy as always, yeah.
Even as classy,
yeah.
And they live all the way out in the outskirts, so they have business meetings, quote unquote, and they use his apartment as basically a brothel.
I think that's a little bit harsh, but
use it as a brothel. And then his wonderful Jewish neighbor brings it to his attention that he always has a chick over, and
Mr. Dreyfus.
And it's the quintessential Jewish nosy neighbor with the very intrusive.
You gotta be a mensch. You gotta be a mensch. A human being. No, I think his wife is even better. She is a classic Jewish wife with the no napkins. Nice, clean boy when he moved in. Total quintessential Jew mom right there.
Exactly. But what happens when one of the people that he actually enjoys the company of and thinks and highly respects, and he sees her come into his apartment.
Yeah. And
that's what the film is about. It's about him falling for a woman and then noticing what happens to her and all the hijinks that ensues, because it is a comedy. It is a very dark comedy, but it is a comedy in its essence.
Well, I would agree to that, but I also think one of the things that's interesting about it is you've got kind of a duality to his character, because he is this portrayed as the ultimate Mr. Nice Guy, taken advantage of, but he also wants to get ahead, and he's using it to his advantage, and you see some kind of where he tries to be that person during the movie, and obviously it fails miserably. Yeah. But you do see a duality to his character that I think it's really underappreciated when you're watching that, because you do get lost in the Mr. Nice Guy aspect. But he actually does have some pretty, like, I want to be successful and this is my road to success. And I think, the fact that he lets these, for lack of a better word, dalliances happen in his apartment, he's condoning the behavior almost. He's not, there's not a lot of judgment about what these men are doing. That's actually not a huge theme in the movie where, like, C.C. Baxter, his name, I don't know if you've mentioned it.
No.
He doesn't see anything wrong with what they're doing. It's basically it's a part of life, Yeah, but
it's a different lifestyle at that time and
But
place.
if you think of him as this gooey-eyed romantic for the lady interest in his life, you'd think that he might have a little bit of an issue with what these guys are doing, but he's not. He's kind of like, okay, what can I do to support this? Because I want to get ahead. So there is kind of that weird part of that movie, that duality, like I said.
Yeah, but I also think that he kind of fell into this position, and because he fell into the position, he has now the responsibility to uphold it. Right. And because if not, then he's going to lose his job. And the fear of losing his job when he allowed it once, and that's where his conscience kind of takes over mid-film. Yeah. And you see that, like, I could see why he will allow it to happen, because it is that very New York atmosphere. Just we recently saw The Devil Wears Prada, and that is very similar to this, that it is that New York lifestyle that consumes a person and changes a person.
Yeah, I can see that, but it's just there's something about it, the fact that it's like these are men he aspires to be almost, you know what I mean? And so you've kind of got this weird... It's a love story, but it's got those darker elements and undertones in it. It's hard to get past when you're thinking of him as a Mr. Nice Guy, because I think it's the absolute cliche in most movies that you've got the ultimate Mr. Nice Guy that's always walked all over, and that's kind of how he's portrayed, but he's really not. He is
walked over.
He is walked over, but he's allowing himself to be walked over. I'm sorry, halfway through the movie, you kind of want to be like, grow a pair already.
I don't know if I'm
allowed to say that, but...
No, I definitely agree that he does need to stand up and say something, and he finally does. But the reason he does is because he falls in love. And I think that's crucial in the story in this particular film, and that's why I think it stands the test of time, is because of the way that transition happens.
Well, you could also argue that he wasn't really thinking about it from the woman's perspective, all these girls, until someone that he was interested in he was seeing the other half of it and the potential negative impact on their life and how it impacted him. So maybe it's like he didn't really care until it really impacted him.
Or the doe-eyed innocence of it behind that. Yeah. That he kind of like, he understood what was happening, but he didn't really understand the impact that it could have on these women, because he just thought that these women knew what was going on.
But they seem to, and they don't seem to care either. And I think that's one of the interesting things about this movie. Again, to the whole 1960s thing. You think about the time. You're thinking like Doris Day, Rock Hudson. They're singing their way through these musicals. And then you've got this story that's all about infidelity. About sleaziness, and it is real. It is real, and I think that's the good part about this movie, and that's why I go back to it every year, because it is very raw, and I think there are so many truisms in what they say about her life, and like how it's not always rosy, and things are going on, and the fact that his characters had a lot of issues too, and they reference back to really bad things that have happened in his life, but they're not sugarcoating anything, and I think that's a really powerful part of this movie.
I love also the kind of salesmanship that each of the characters bring forward. They all portray a different character. And, you have the Ray Walston, the Joe Dobson? Yes.
Yeah.
The one that calls on the phone and, hey, the very transatlantic accent. And
no wonder I couldn't get in the executive washroom this morning.
And he has these lines that just stand out, and they're so 1960s, and they just feel like real.
But I love the way all through it they always say, like, insurance-wise, money-wise, like, Kubelik-wise.
Yeah. Like, it feels genuine, this film. It really does. And there's a lot of films in the 1960s that feel very fake. Like you said, they feel very, like, just glossy, and this doesn't have that glossiness to it, which adds whole complete other layers, and you could actually believe these characters, which is really
Well,
cool.
they have fallacy and they're flawed, and I think that that's the most important part. Is no one, including Jack Lemmon himself, which is usually
Exactly.
a titular character, is usually very much they don't portray them as having flaws and setbacks. And I think it's very easy to see. He's a guppy basically.
Yeah.
And he's a pawn of these men, but he wants to get ahead. He wants to be them. He especially wants to be the main guy, the head of HR. Like, I think that's who he really aspires to, is this symbol of
Jeff Sheldrake.
Yeah, Sheldrake,
Yeah.
played by awesome Fred McMurray.
Which he does. Let's talk about the cast a little bit.
Yeah, sure.
So the cast actually involves Jack Lemmon, Shirley MacLaine, Fred McMurray, Ray Walton, something like that. Hope Holiday. I mean, this has like literally. There's even a Naomi Stevens in there.
Oh, look at that. But then you also, we'll talk about the cast, but then you also have to look at the director.
Yeah.
And,
Billy Wilder.
Billy Wilder, yes, definitely.
Yes.
And this was in his element, I think.
This was in his prime.
Like, you're coming off of movies like Some Like It Hot and all of that, and it's very reminiscent of that same thing, especially that pairing with Jack Lemmon and that dynamic you get from it.
And it was incredible that they got away with this film.
Do you think so?
I think so, because this was also right in the McCarthy era, where a lot of people were the what do you call it, the Maze Code, all that stuff was actually in full effect, where you had to have a spin wheel if there's a mistress and all that stuff. And if it wasn't for films like Lolita, that was what changed everything in the film industry. And this film was a year after Lolita,
Right.
That's incredible. Like, the fact that these two directors were able to break down that wall, and it was way ahead of its time.
Well, it was, and they don't hide anything. That's what I love about this movie. There's no innuendo. It is very straightforward what it is and what's happening. And, even the plug to halfway through when they've got that Marilyn Monroe-esque girl, and it's very clear, I only need 45 minutes, and he's like, make it 30. Like, it's very clear what's happening there.
Yeah, and I think this film has a lot of identifiable characters. And honestly, my favorite personal character in this film is the wife of the next door neighbor. Like,
Mrs. Dreyfus?
She is the best. I love her. When she comes over, she has that comedic element in those really, really tense moments of drama.
Right.
And just adds the comedic relief that is needed just to drop it down a notch.
Well, I think she's the type of person, like, every guy watches her and envisions his mother lecturing him, and especially when she's talking about him not having napkins. I just think that every guy has felt that moment with a mother or a mother-like figure in their life where they're like, what are you doing? What are you doing with yourself, with the drinking and the women? I'm telling you, that line where she's like, seems like such a clean boy. Like, just, it was very, very, very... very much
judging,
at that time,
but not judging at the same time.
Oh no, it's totally judging, and it's totally Jewish mom guilt right there. When she brings over like the chicken noodle soup and everything, it's a cliche to a T. Come on.
And the face that she gives him.
Yes.
The judgmental face.
Or when she's feeding her and she's like, be quiet when he comes back. And she'll say it right to his face is the best part. Like, it's, she is definitely one of my favorite characters. But I really, really love Fred McMurray as Mr. Sheldrake in it, because I think it's sort of like when he was in Double Indemnity. He's kind of this unsavory character, and he's very, very flawed, and I kind of like, we're not doing spoilers, obviously, but I like the fact that it's not an easy road for him throughout the entire movie, and that you see him getting kind of screwed over, and you enjoy it. It's one of those characters where you like seeing him get bad things happen to him, and you really want him to get his own in the end.
And the writing, that goes a lot to the writing that Billy Wilder did in this, because he also wrote this film.
Right.
Which was kind of, it wasn't rare, but it was something that was not easy to do for films like this, that involved these kind of intricate characters. A lot of the films that were written by the director at that time were very fluff piece, very glossy, very quick niche films and stuff like that, and they weren't really a lot of information and a lot of characters in them.
I feel like this is the type of movie where you can feel that he really thought and fleshed out the characters in advance, and he created these backstories, and probably a lot of what he created in his head didn't end up in the script, but that's what helped humanize him, is the fact that he did have those little pieces where he was talking about their past, things that you don't see but they reference, and you can see how it impacts the entire movie. And just even the slightest reference to like when she failed the typing test, and you can just feel the despair of everything that has gone wrong in her life, even though she doesn't reference it. You can feel it, and then you identify more with her character of having those failed moments and having to regroup yourself And I think it really helps. And like I said, there's just so many like amazing lines in there, one-liners, or even just 2 or 3 like little nuggets in there where you're like, damn, that's just so true, and it's happened in my life. And I think the fact that it's still relatable. What we're talking 60 years later now?
60 years,
yeah.
yeah.
So,
that's insane that it's 60 years ago.
But it's still so relevant, and you could still see it happening today. Like, you can totally see the scenario happening today, especially in New York, in that environment.
They're still making movies that are very similar to this. They have the exact same plot lines, the exact same emotions, the same characters for even. Right. And they're modern pieces, and that's horrible on humanity's fact that we're still doing the same bullshit.
Right.
But at the same time, it's also something that shows you the timelessness of these characters.
It is.
And especially Shirley MacLaine's character, like, oh my god, some of the things that she does in this film are so great. It's so great. And just the acting in this, you could see the classic acting in it. And that's something to behold, because a lot of the films nowadays, they lose that emotion.
Well, and there are little subtleties that are beautiful throughout this entire film, like the references to the Chinese restaurant.
Yes.
The fact that it comes back many times. It comes back with the music when she walks in. They play the same song, and you know, you have that moment where you're going back to somebody that you had a relationship with before, and she makes that comment, you know, same booth, same drinks, same shrimp, and then she makes a comment that the sauce has changed and it's only been 6 weeks. But then later on, when she brings in the record of you know, from there, and then, you know, when the secretary later on is referencing, you know, it's always the same booth in the back of the restaurant. I like that's just, it's an inconsequential piece, but it's all the way through the movie. And it's one of those things I think about relationships, especially where you've got those places that you go, and they've got such strong remembrances with them. And especially with, obviously, Mr. Sheldrake using that as his go-to spot during it. And you, like, you understand and identify with all these women who are never seen in the movie, but clearly when they're referenced by Mrs. Olsen later on, or Miss Olsen, his secretary,
exactly.
You know, you all of a sudden you see his whole life and what he's been doing and how he's been behaving, you know, and it's just a few lines.
And it's the subtlety of the eyes and the mouth and the facial expressions that are done in the film. And that type of acting is not done anymore. You have films nowadays, you could literally be watching your phone and get everything that's going on because it's all audio based. In these films from the 60s and 70s, especially the 60s and 70s, you had to watch the film because the quality of the film was in that. In looking at the facial expressions of the actors, these were theater actors.
You sound like Norma Desmond from Sunset Boulevard. We didn't need words, we had faces.
It's true, though.
But it's exactly what you sound like.
True.
Like, yeah, but I think that's part of it. And a lot of it's just in their mannerisms or the way they act, like that scene when Jack Lemmon is making the spaghetti and he's using a tennis racket. The quintessential single guy moment that he doesn't have a strainer. He has a tennis racket, but it's so beautiful because he's just singing to himself in the kitchen, and you see him kind of just the actual, like, the bachelorism of that moment where it's like clearly he's just does not have a woman in his life and he has not got his stuff together, but he's found a way. Classic bachelor of that time. Like the tennis, I love the tennis racket.
And they don't make it a factor. They don't point it out enough where they're like drawing attention to it like they do in modern films. Yeah. In most rom-coms now, they will draw attention to the fact that he's using that as a strainer. This one, it's just the subtlety of the action.
Well, yeah, it is. And I think, you know, or like earlier in the film when he's sitting alone with a TV dinner and he's flipping through the channels because he's feeling lonely. It's those little things. Like, it's a scene that really doesn't add a lot to the plot of the movie, but it adds so much depth to his character of being lonely, of kind of not having anyone in his life, and
building the momentum.
Yeah, you know, and I think it's just amazing, just those little subtle cues that just, it's so much about character development in this movie because it is a quiet movie. Yeah. It's not.
But it is a fast-paced movie.
I wouldn't say it's fast-paced. I'd say it keeps your attention, but it's not like there's not huge dramatic moments that keep you going. It's a pretty steady pace throughout it, but it's the way they build the characters that you want to keep you engage with them and you want to know what's going to happen. And I think it's one of the things that's sort of lost in rom-coms now, especially.
Yeah, it's all about peaks in rom-coms now. This has its subtlety, and it is very monotone in the sense that it doesn't have those peaks.
Right.
But I think it catches your attention every moment of it because those, it's 2 hours long? It's 2 hours and 5 minutes long. That doesn't feel like 2 hours and 5 minutes. It feels like an hour and 20 max.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
It goes so quick, and the pacing of it is so deliberate, and the editing on this is just, it's something that is to behold, and we don't see a lot of that nowadays.
Well, especially the scenes in the apartment, because you're looking at basically a classic New York apartment. It's a straight shot through his apartment, and there's somewhere, like, it's very long shots continuously, but because of how the characters are interplaying with that and just how they set it up, it's just amazing because you just see those different layers coming through the apartment, like especially that scene where it's like shot from the record player where the music was playing, and then you see her crying in a chair and Sheldrake by the door, and it's just this really beautiful long shot, and you see through to that empty bedroom that is such a catalyst in the movie of what happens. And clearly it's like this little dark den of iniquity because of all the women and men that have gone through there. So,
but I love the symbolism in the apartment too. I'm glad that you brought that up, because there's also the fact that there's the bedroom on the side and then the kitchen, and the bedroom is hidden by the door halfway through the film. Until she actually comes to the apartment, you never see the bedroom.
That's true. I didn't think about that.
And it's a hidden gem. Like, now the room is finally open to him, and this is where the emotions start coming up, because the bedroom is where the emotions started. And it's Billy Wilder had this wild aspect, pun intended, about what do you call it?
You're such a nerd.
About like doing these subtleties in film, and it's very Hitchcockian as well, where every movement of the camera or lack thereof is a symbol of what the character's going through. It's the reason why Vertigo and North by Northwest and all these movies are so substantial, is because we're getting in the mind of this character, and that's the same thing that's happening with this.
Well, yeah, it almost has that, I would say almost that voyeur effect of Psycho. You've entered into his life, and you're seeing it from his perspective, and of course he's narrating the movie, at least in the beginning. I don't know if it doesn't really go through all of it, but
it's only the beginning.
Yeah, so he intros you in and where you're immediately on his side almost, where you're like, oh, okay, this is what his life is. But the way you're doing it, it's just like you're like appearing in through a window of his life and watching what's happening, and you really engage with it that way. And it's like you said, it's very much like Hitchcock, where he said that's basically what a movie is. This is how you're entering into someone's life and having a chance to participate in it, but then you can safely remove yourself. Of course, in his context, he was always saying it's letting your violent side out, which clearly this movie is not that. But I do think it allows you to explore those relationships, especially failed relationships or the want of a relationship. I think that's what this movie is really most powerfully focused on. Is like whenever you've sat there and you've had that love from a distance, and you just know it's not going to happen. And it's a dark and it's a very sad theme, but I think it's not like an emotional movie. I don't cry during it, but I definitely do. It does bring up those like, wow, you can relate to that feeling of that, idealized person. Yeah. And there's something to the fact that he idealizes Fran Kubelik, and she's a very flawed character. Like, she has some major flaws, and he doesn't see it. He only sees this perfect idea he has of her. And I think that's part of the movie, of him coming to accept the fact that she's not the perfect woman. And I think especially with what happens during the movie and how he has to take care of her and bring her back basically to her life again. I mean, he saves her life during the movie. So I think it speaks a lot to the fact that he had to come to terms with the fact that she had these issues, and he had created this like perfect little image of her in his mind, and it just, that wasn't the case at all. And
I love that, because this is also it's one of the first times I think that they bring up like a suicide mental wellness type of issue in films that are major mainstream films. Well, yeah, and I think, showing, especially, it's not even a reference to, it's actively shown. Yeah. And it goes throughout it. And like I said, it's those relatable themes to even now that, where her life is falling apart and she's having that moment where she's like, okay, this is my only out. And yes, it's dramatic, But even the mother, the wife from next door, the Jewish mother, like, she comes over and says, honey, it's going to be okay. We all go through our moments, but in the end, we'll get past this. Right. And that's like incredible, because this is 1960s. This was pre all this stuff of, oh my God, I need a safe space. I need this. I need that. I want to better myself because I'm feeling this depression and all that stuff. That was never in films. And if it was extremely subtle and underplayed. Mm-hmm. In this one, it was front row and center. Well, and, Jack Lemmon references that he was going to try to kill himself in a previous time in his life during it. So it's not an isolated part of the film. It is a huge part of it. Depression. Yeah. I think that the fact that it references, again, those dark themes, very, very dark all the way through it, but still it has that
kind of feel-good quality to it that you can't describe. One of my favorite moments is actually... One of my favorite moments, and it goes back to what you said about facial expressions and things like that, is when he opens up her mirror and it's broken. And he makes that connection that the mirror he found is hers, and how she says, it makes me look the way I feel. Who can't connect with that moment? That overly dramatic, but still...
It's the Rosebud moment.
It's the Rosebud moment.
And that was done better than Citizen Kane. Fuck you, Citizen Kane.
Oh, don't be a hater on Citizen Kane. Come on. It has its moments.
No. I'm sorry.
No, it does.
I will argue that point to the death.
No, it has its moments. It does. You know what? We're not going down that road.
No.
But it has its moments, and you're wrong, and you need to accept that.
I refuse to.
No, you know what?
No. I refuse to.
You don't think it has some...
It has merit in a cinematography sense, because it did set the bar in a lot of ways, but the film as a film itself, not as a film itself,
but I think about... I do like, going off on a tangent a little bit, but I do like the fact that you're looking at it was such a slap in the face to William Randolph Hearst, and you were looking at basically a lonely, bitter man, and you've got those really, again, it's those dark themes that I love that we don't have in movies now so much, unless they're horror movies. This is all about character development.
Yeah.
And Citizen Kane is one of those ones where it's slow.
Yeah.
It is painfully slow, where you want to gouge your eyes out at some point going, who the hell is Rosebud and why can we not get there? But that development of characters, especially with the second wife, because she's this pitiful character, and all the way through it, you want to understand why he is such a freaking asshole all the way through it. So I do, you know what, but we're not on Citizen Kane, but you're wrong. There is wonderful character development in it. Yes, it's overrated. It doesn't belong on any magic bucket list of movies in my mind. And the fact that they rated
it as the number one best film of all time.
Well, that's because it's the cliched number one film of best time. But I do think it has merit just from a term of character development. I do think it was reminiscent of the same things that you were talking about that you love in The Apartment, is the fact that it's development of a flawed character.
I don't know, maybe I didn't see those character developments like I did in this one, but I appreciate this film more than I appreciate
this one, yes, absolutely, so much better than Citizen
Because it
Kane.
handles the same type of material, it handles the same type of storyline, characters, and all that stuff, and does it in a more... It doesn't only thought-provoke you, but it actually allows you to enjoy the time watching it.
Oh, yeah, but here's the thing.
I think that's different.
Well, I think the difference also is in Citizen Kane, you're talking about basically someone you can't identify with. You're talking about a millionaire who was handed life, on a platter for him. Like, here, you have all the money in the world, there's nothing to stop you, and you can fail many times over and it won't affect you. You can't relate to that character. C.C. Baxter, who's talking things down just to his rent and the fact that AC raised the rent up $5 a month, you can relate to that life where you're like counting pennies and you're just kind of living day by day. And like the scene, what I love is that scene when he's sitting at the desk in that sea of other people on the 19th floor, and the symbolism of the different floors in that building, floor 19, floor 25, and when he gets booted up to the higher level floors and he wins the bet with the guy who sits in the desk next to him, you can feel the peon moment of it,
the class struggle moment where each level is a different class.
Oh, definitely, like you said, with the washroom keys and all that, those kind of douchey guys who are basically one level higher than Baxter, but it's a world apart.
So overall, let's wrap up with your final thoughts on this film, and what is the last thing that you want to give to an audience that you think is a little bit different than most people's perspective on this film?
I think so, and the reason we actually watch this is because I watch it every Christmas. I watch it without fail, and I actually started watching it with my mom when I was like 5 or 6 years old. So I connected with this movie when I was very, very young. And for me, this is the type of movie where when you watch it, every year of your life, you're going to get something different from it. And it's one of those movies that transcends everything. When you're watching it and you're single before you've had a serious relationship, you have a very different perspective of the characters and who they are, as opposed to maybe you're at the end of a failed marriage where you're like, wow, I'm seeing this from a new perspective and a new lens. So I think this is the type of movie, and there are very few that come to mind where I watch it every time and I get a different meaning from it and I have different emotions evoked from it. So for me, this movie is in my top 10. It is a 10 out of 10 for me because I think it's perfect. I think the script, how it was filmed, the actors, I'm a big Jack Lemmon fan. I think it was perfection beginning to end.
Okay. All right. I definitely give this a 9 out of 10 because I really did enjoy it, but it's also my first viewing of it. So it's something that I have to come back to revisit to actually give it that coveted 10 out of 10. I do believe that once I saw this, though, I got the whole Jack Lemmon's collection because I'm like, I have to watch all his films. Because I had seen, some Like It Hot and a lot of the Billy Wilder films, but it wasn't really brought to my attention. Because I have a blind spot for a lot of films in that 60s to 70s range.
Well, and I think this is sort of similar to like the fortune cookie, that darker element that he's not usually associated with. He's usually associated with very light comedy. Some Like It Hot being a perfect example, or even in his later work, My Fellow Americans,
Yes.
Grumpy Old Men, classic. But it's just, I think this was at his peak. To me, this is probably his best film that he did, in my perspective. And I've seen most of his work, and for me, this character is just, it's so humbling, and it feels so real. I think that's the biggest thing. All these characters feel very real to me.
I agree. This film is not streaming anywhere, unfortunately, but this is something that you can purchase for under $10, honestly, on either Vudu or Best Buy or any of these websites, or you could buy it used and really watch it. And this is an enjoyable film, though. So anybody out there that does want to check out Lemon's filmography or Billy Wilder, and you want to get into one of those two, this is a good film to start, because I think this does give you a better perspective, and it gives you that in to check out the rest of their catalogs, because both of them, I think, have really great work. But this film, I think, holds up beyond anything else.
Oh, I absolutely agree.
And even to today's standards, a modern audience will still be able to enjoy this. This is a good date movie, even for a modern audience that isn't used to.
And it's one of those movies that's not hindered by the fact that they don't have the technology or anything that we have now, where a lot of movies, they have that dated feel from the 60s, because they're like, oh, well, if they had a cell phone, this problem would have been completely resolved. It doesn't hurt that they don't have that, because it's not a part of the story. So I think that's what kind of adds that timeless element of it.
Exactly. You don't have things that are really, really, like, scrutinizable in the film.
Is that even a word?
No, but I just
Scrutinizable.
Scrutinizable. Scrutinizable. That's right. Another coined phrase for Man Bites Media.
Hashtag scrutinizable. Be on the lookout for it.
So thank you guys for tuning in to this episode. Thank you, Naomi, for joining us. And
for Woman Bites Film.
Yeah, that's right.
Woman Bites Film. Woman
Bites Retro.
Woman Bites Retro. Woman Bites Retro.
How about People Might Bite Retro?
No, I'm gonna go with woman.
They?
Woman.
I could play the pronoun game.
Don't make me mad. I'll do woman with a Y. Get a full feminist movement going here.
So Naomi is going to be a regular on the show. Pretty much, it's going to be a co-host situation, and we're going to be running both of these conversations, because I think we have fun, interesting conversations and perspectives.
Discussions.
Quotes. Quote unquote. So thank you guys for joining us, and stay tuned next week for another episode as we restart Man Bites Retro.
Woman.